a war of the people of Russia. This is Putin's war. This war is an attack on our peace in Europe. This war is an attack on our freedom. This war is an attack on international law. This war is an attack on all values of an international structure of dealing with one another. It is an attack on peaceful coexistence among peoples. It is a war that makes it necessary for us to entirely rethink the foundations of our foreign policy. Just a few weeks ago, regarding weapons exports, I said that our foreign policy about turn, as you like, is something we can change when the moment comes, and alas, the moment has now come. We waited as long as we could for this. We carried out diplomatic efforts as long as we could. The Kremlin lied to us and made ridiculous everything that we have pushed for as Europeans. Putin wanted this war, whatever it takes. Russia attacked Ukraine ruthlessly, and Ukraine, like any country in this world, has a right to defend itself. This is in the Charter of the United Nations. And we, based on the foundation of international law, have a duty to support and defend this Charter of the United Nations together. Perhaps it is the case that Germany has been particularly careful and reticent in the past about international involvement. The rules that we set ourselves as Germany cannot be used to relinquish us from our responsibilities. If we find ourselves in a completely different world, our policy must keep up with this. A country with a parliamentary-approved army and democratic scrutiny can and must allow itself, and we are doing that from today, when it comes to questions of peace and war, to make decisions based on full responsibility. When it comes to weapons, exports, and military operations, we will continue to be reticent and careful. But when Putin attacks Ukraine, we must support Ukraine. Apart from our major economic and humanitarian support for Ukraine, we will now also deliver military material and weapons to Ukraine so it can defend itself. Because we cannot leave Ukraine at the mercy of its aggressor, wreaking havoc and murder on this country. And I want to thank all of you, because that is the strength of our liberal democracy, that we can wage disputes with one another. But when it comes down to defending our basic values, across all parliamentary groups, we join forces. Thank you for that. We are doing that because it's about people's lives, because our international structures, our political structures, are called into question. We're doing it in a calm, reflected manner to defend peace in Europe. And this is also a clear message we are sending to Vladimir Putin. The price of this war waged against innocent people and this flagrant breach of the United Nations will be unbearably high for Putin. We must, and the German Chancellor has emphasized this, do many things at once. We need to ensure that the people in Ukraine are supplied with what they need, with medical aids, with safe places to stay, roofs over their heads. We have contributed to the humanitarian UN emergency fund. We have added 5 million to that. For the International Red Cross community, we have put 10 million euros into that fund. With everything we have, we will work towards ensuring that the people who are forced to flee their homes, that every single one of them get a safe roof over their heads. And we have prepared for that. That is another strength we have, not just within the European Union, but together with our friends in Canada, in the US, and in many other places in the world. We are not going to abandon Ukrainians who have to flee. And yes, we do have to talk about money here, and I would request your support in the draft budget to earmark this money for humanitarian causes so we can support and protect these people. There are 3 further elements that are key. Firstly, sanctions. And the bitter reality is no sanction can stop this insanity right now. If we had a means of sanction that could stop it immediately, we would have put it in place right away. But what our sanctions can do, and this is key, is to show Putin that in the medium and long term, this war will ruin your country. Putin's insidious game must be stopped, and this is why our sanctions must be severe, and that's why we must ensure that we are in it for the long haul, that we don't run out of energy after 3 months. Our sanctions must hit Putin where it hurts. And this is why these things all go hand in hand, economically, financially, and humanitarianly. And this is why, let me say to Putin and to Lavrov, you too are responsible for this war. And this is why there will be further sanctions regarding banks, oligarchs, and family members of those responsible for it. And this is why SWIFT, and I know when I say that word, some people feel nervous, but let me ask for your trust. This is why we have set SWIFT up, so that it will impact on the Putin system and will not boomerang back and affect us. And this is why we are addressing this and taking our international responsibilities seriously. We support our allies, NATO, as the Chancellor has already made clear. NATO is a guarantor of our security and our liberty. That's why it was founded, and nothing has changed in this regard. My last point, yes, we have to show that we are resolute, but we represent international law, and we are committed to international law, which is why dialogue has to be part of it. Not dialogue with the aggressor, but dialogue with the international community. This must be our focus. It's not just about Europe. No country in this world can accept their sovereignty being at the disposal of a stronger neighbor as it suits them. Because if that were the case, Putin would have won. And this is why we need to ensure that all of the member states who support the UN Charter must take a stance against this aggression. So let me appeal to all of our partners worldwide. From this Parliament, next week, take a stance at the UN General Assembly. That is our peace structure. We must defend it together now. And when it comes to the choice between war and peace, the choice between an aggressor and children who have to hide in underground stations. No one can be neutral. Thank you for making that so clear here today.
And that was Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock addressing the Bundestag. For Annalena Baerbock, we heard from the opposition leader Friedrich Merz. And before that, of course, we heard from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, speeches that were really full of emotion. As Annalena Baerbock just said, this is a war that has made it necessary to rethink the foundations of our foreign policy. Here in the studio with us is our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane. Melinda, as I said, some really quite emotional words there from all three. If you can sum it up for us, what were the most important messages, starting with the speech that Chancellor Olaf Scholz made?
We really heard all three speakers recognizing that this is a wrenching moment for the German people, that people are sitting at their tables saying, what's going on? How can there be war once again in Europe? And so what we're seeing here from all of them is an attempt to really put this in context, as both the Chancellor said and the opposition leader in different words. The world today is different from the world before the 24th of February. And in some ways, what we're looking at is, for Germans, the end of the thinking that has been a continual theme throughout the post-war era. Germany, having learned that lesson from World War II, never again war, that meant to many Germans that Germany, in a way, was renouncing military action. Of course, it's part of NATO. Of course, it does have a military, and it does commit some spending to military hardware and software. But nonetheless, there was a sense that military tools, as Clausewitz said, military measures as a continuation of policy and diplomacy were off limits for Germans, and that diplomacy is everything. And that's a lesson that reflected not only World War II, but also the Cold War, when Germany became famous for Ostpolitik, Willy Brandt's attempt to reach out across the Iron Curtain to the countries of Eastern Europe through cultural exchange, through diplomacy, and thereby take them along in a process of change. And for many Germans, especially on the left side of the political spectrum, that's what brought the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain down, not necessarily deterrence, although, in fact, the Social Democratic Party here in the Cold War also practiced deterrence by stationing Pershing weapons that definitely helped to bring the Soviet Union to its knees. At any rate, what we're now hearing from all three is we're in a different world, and to the German people, we now must stand up and defend our values and defend our democracy, because this war in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. It is about all of Europe. It is about the security order of Europe. As the Chancellor said, it's about whether we go back to a 19th century realpolitik where might makes right and the strongest determine the shape of Europe. And I think a very clear recognition that this is going to mean changes, as you said, not only in foreign policy, but in energy policy, in defense policy, in relations with allies, and, of course, in relations with Russia. And we also heard a very strong message from all three saying, we actually can't do business with Putin anymore as we thought we could. And the Chancellor Scholz quoted himself once again saying as much diplomacy as possible without naivete, and then said, but we have learned, essentially, we cannot now conduct dialogue with Putin. It's not working.
It was interesting because actually the last thing that Scholz was talking about was that we want peace in Europe and we will always push for peaceful solutions. However, the world is now different. And I think, we were hearing things that we would never, ever have expected just months ago, talking about this important investment in the military to greater applause, I might add.
100 billion in this year alone now being earmarked for upgrading the military, and boy, does it need upgrading. As we know, many capabilities of the German military looking very, very rusty in recent years. And then he said very clearly, in black and white, we will be committing more than 2% of our GDP to military spending. NATO allies have been pushing for that for years and years, one U.S. president after another. I think many of us remember even the pressure that was put on by Barack Obama on this. Well, apparently, it is finally going to come to pass. That is a very, very big step for a social democratic chancellor to take.
Absolutely. It's extraordinary times. Chief Political Correspondent Melinda Crane, thank you for your analysis. All right, and we're going to be crossing now to our Chief Political Editor, Michaela Küffner, who was there listening to those speeches. Michaela, give us a sense of what's just been said, the enormity of what's just been said there.
Look, I'm still rubbing my ears and eyes, frankly. It is safe to say that over the past 24 hours, with the turnaround on German policy to now deliver weapons to Ukraine after all, slapping all of a sudden more than twice the current defense budget on top of the Bundeswehr budget, which still has to be decided in the Bundestag, now calling Vladimir Putin out as an aggressor who clearly nobody here in Germany believes they can still do business with, wanting to strengthen NATO, and the Green Party and the Social Democrats, who are traditionally leaning towards pacifism, now saying, yes, this is what is required right now. It is actually safe to say that over the past 24 hours, we have seen a paradigm shift in German security, defense, and foreign policy, as we have not seen over the past 24 years in total. That is the magnitude of what has happened here today in the German Bundestag. And this is also why we saw very emotional scenes with the Ukrainian ambassador being in the room here today, with parliamentarians standing ovations for him, resounding support of Ukraine, and a unity between the opposition and the governing Social Democrat coalition, which I have not seen before. And this is all less than 100 days into Olaf Scholz being Chancellor here in Germany.
Now, this brings me on to my next question. We also heard from Friedrich Merz, the opposition leader. We heard the fact that he was talking about a common path, parties united, we're offering support. So this really can be seen at the moment as unity to an extent amongst Germany's political parties, main political parties.
Absolutely. Resounding unity, that firm action, unity is needed, that defense spending has to skyrocket. It's nothing below that. That now NATO needs to be united, that unity, Olaf Scholz said, is the strength of the West, that this is a historic moment. We live in a new era, he said, that requires that unity also to be carried forward. And Friedrich Merz, who is Angela Merkel's successor as party leader, who lost in the past elections, did not become Chancellor, he actually said we all here share the responsibility for the underfunding of the German armed forces. They need to be able to defend themselves. They were at pains actually to determine what they could actually deliver to Ukraine in support, because there's such an overstretching of resources in the German armed forces. So it truly is a new era also in terms of how Germany is thinking about its own security and assisting partners. But there's one caveat, of course, I have to say, because opposition is opposition. Friedrich Merz said, well, those 100 billion euros, we still need to talk about this, because that would mean taking on new debt, something they are fundamentally opposed. But at this crucial moment in time, the broadest possible imaginable unity with even those voices in the Greens who have an audience that is against any form of bolstering defense whatsoever, now being on board to take this very unusual step here by Olaf Scholz.
DW's Chief Political Editor, Michaela Küffner, thank you very much. OK, returning to the latest events on the ground in the Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russian forces of targeting civilian infrastructure after a fourth night of attacks across Ukraine. Overnight, Moscow hit airfields and fuel facilities, including a civilian oil depot 30 kilometers south of Kyiv. Its forces also blew up a pipeline near Kharkiv in the east. Authorities say the blast could cause an environmental catastrophe that Ukraine's pipeline operator says it hasn't yet affected supply. This comes as some Russian forces were seen entering the city after meeting stiff resistance. They've ordered to advance in Ukraine from all directions. And we can cross straight to DW correspondent Fanny Fachar, who's in Khmelnytsky in western Ukraine. Good morning, Fanny. Tell us about the night and how things are looking where you are this morning.
Relatively calm where I am right now, but people are always preparing where is the next shelter, where can they go to if again they hear there's an alarm. You have to go. There are there's a military airbase nearby, military warehouse about 30 to 50 kilometers from here that have been attacked during the previous days, not last night, however, but there was a critical infrastructure attacked near Kyiv, as we have just heard, an oil terminal, and also there was a lot of fighting in the northeastern part of Kyiv. Apparently saboteurs dressing as Ukrainian soldiers, and apparently also taking a tank, most likely from a military airbase near Kyiv, that's been heavily fought between Ukrainian and Russian forces. There is conflicting information whether that military airbase Hostomel is now in Russian or in Ukrainian hands. But as we have just heard President Zelensky pointing out, there were really a lot of attacks, missiles that were raining basically over various Ukrainian cities, also attacking civilian infrastructure. And he also said that the Russian forces don't even take care to at least try to prevent, to attack ambulances or anything that's somehow connected to civilian infrastructure. So very difficult night in various parts once again in Ukraine.
And yet we've just heard, Fanny, that a Russian delegation has arrived in Belarus, supposedly to offer talks with Ukrainian officials. How is this going down in Ukraine? What's the government's response to this?
Zelensky just stated that they are not going to go to Belarus. In fact, that they see this in a way almost like as a provocation, because it was from Belarus, according to Ukrainian government, where Russian troops were dispatched from. So to them, having a meeting in Belarus with the Russians is basically something that doesn't serve their interest. They say they're ready to negotiate, but not in Belarus. In fact, a couple of days ago, President Zelensky suggested Warsaw as a possible place. So Poland. There was no reaction to that. There is a door open to negotiation from the Ukrainian perspective. This was something that was put forward all before this entire full-scale invasion started on Thursday. But the Ukrainian President Zelensky also makes clear it's not going to happen on any condition, but also not just not in Belarus for the very reason that I just mentioned, because they are seen as being part of this entire escalation that's playing out here in Ukraine.
All right. DW correspondent Fanny Fachar in Ukraine. Thanks so much. Let's take a listen to what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had to say in response to the Kremlin's offer to talk.
That's why we say now, not Minsk. Other cities could be the venue for the meeting. Of course, we want peace. We want to meet. We want an end to war.
And we're joined now by Natalia Smolentseva, who is a journalist in Moscow. Natalia, welcome. We've just heard this announcement of a Russian delegation in Belarus. The Kremlin says it's offering talks with Ukraine. Can you tell us more about this development?
Yes, just about an hour ago, there've been information from the Russian Kremlin press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, who announced that Russian delegation has already arrived to Belarus, to city of Gomel, which is situated close to the border with Ukraine and to the border with Russia, and they're already there to hold talks with the Ukrainian side. Here has been this back and forth what comes to negotiations, because on Friday Russia supposedly after the suggestion of Ukraine to discuss the neutral status of the country, suggested Belarus as the place to hold these negotiations. And they say they even stopped this military operation for a couple of hours while waiting for the response from Ukraine. And what came then was a suggestion to hold talks somewhere else. And after that, the Russia resumed its attack. And now we heard that there is a negotiation going on there. But also at the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed directly to the Ukrainian army and to the Ukrainian people, urging them to basically talk to Russian government directly to overthrow government in Kiev. So there is actually not clear position here on whether Russia actually wants these talks. And also in Belarus right now, today is an important day because today there is a referendum on constitutional referendum in Belarus. So Belarus is deciding also its own fate and path forward. But President Lukashenko and Belarusian side has already confirmed they're also ready for these talks.
All right, Natalia Smolentseva in Moscow, thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
You're watching DW News live from Berlin, and here's a quick recap of what's happening. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has laid the blame for Russia's invasion of Ukraine on President Vladimir Putin. Scholz defended his landmark decision to send defensive weapons to Ukraine, saying there could be no other response to Putin's aggression. Don't forget, you can always get DW News on the go. You just download our app from Google Play or from the App Store, and that will give you access to all the latest news from around the world, as well as push notifications for any breaking news. And if you're part of a news story, you can also use the DW app to send us photos and videos of what is happening. That's it for now. You're up to date. And don't forget, there is, of course, complete coverage of Russia's war against Ukraine on our website. That's dw.com, as well as on Twitter and Instagram at DW News. Thanks so much for watching.
The 77%. This time, it's all about sports, both new and traditional. Plus, an exclusive interview with marathon superstar Eliud Kipchoge.
What are these values that you say, they're so important to you?
Integrity, courage to go to the next mile, the value of self-discipline, the value of consistency.
The 77%. Next on DW.
Priceless treasures stolen from war zones, plundered and looted for the international art market. Collectors covet these extremely valuable and unique pieces from the Middle East, which fetch top prices at European auction houses. An immoral business that fills the coffers of terrorist factions. Blood treasures.
In 45 minutes on DW. Some are driven by merciless greed. Others are fighting the destruction.
When the invaders came to Brazil, they shut down the natives. Today, the government is trying to destroy the indigenous people with large-scale projects.
Land grabbers are exploiting the Amazon rainforest. Indigenous peoples are now bravely opposing them because it's not only the Earth's green lungs that are dying.
Without the rainforest, we cease to exist and our people die out.
A long-term report from the heart of Brazil starts March 9th on DW.
Hello and a warm welcome to the 77%, our program for you, Africa's youth. I'm Edith Kimani, and this week we have a very special show for you, coming to you from Eldoret, the home of champions. This week, we take a deep dive into the world of sports across the continent. Here's what we have for you. We investigate how to tackle corruption in Kenyan sports institutions. Marathon legend Eliud Kipchoge tells us his secrets on how to keep your mind on track. And in South Africa, we meet the BMX spinners of Soweto. Africa has produced some of the greatest names across different sporting disciplines, from footballers to basketballers, and of course, from right here, distance runners. Yet the continent continues to grapple with lack of government investment, for example, or gross mismanagement of teams, and perhaps worst of all, corruption in sports institutions.